Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Omnipod. Take Omnipod Dash out for a spin with a no-commitment free 30-day trial. By Inhaled Insulin, glucose management in the moment. And by Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, Sage Donnelly started kayaking with her father at age 2. He'd sit her right in there with him. She was diagnosed with type 1 at age 3 and got right back in the water.
When I was 5, I got in my own boat and started running like kind of smaller, easier rivers. And then when I was 7, I was like, I want to start competing because every year we went to Colorado and watched a bunch of competitions. I was like, well, I want to do the competitions. Why are we sitting here? And then my life took off from there.
It sure did take off. Donnelly was the Junior Women's Freestyle World Champion and earned a spot in the Olympics, although she's decided more recently to go in another direction. We talk about how she keeps her diabetes gear protected in the water, treating lows during 3-day remote adventures, and more. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. Always so glad to have you here. You know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. I am your host, Stacey Sims. And first, a quick shout out to the great people I met in Raleigh, North Carolina recently. JDRF had one of their meetups. It was kind of like a cross between a walk kickoff and a conference, and it was all outside and the weather was great. It didn't do much for my allergies. I think I'm still recovering. Sorry if I sound a little scratchy, but man, it was worth it. Really fun to get out there, meet a lot of people. If you're familiar, I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I knew a couple of people there, but I met a bunch of new folks, and it's just fantastic to be out and about again. We're doing another one in Greensboro in a couple of weeks. Ironically, I can't do the event here in Charlotte because I will be out of town, but I'm glad we're having meetups again. A special shout out to Dennis Goldenson, who I've known for a long time. He's in the podcast Facebook group, which you should be into. It's Diabetes Connections, the group. And I see Dennis at a lot of North Carolina events and Raleigh events, and he was taking the pictures. But a special shout out to him because he just received his 50-year medal from the Joslin Center for being a person with type 1 for 50 years. He is so open with his story, with inspiration, with the honesty that comes with living long with diabetes. And I just want to take a second to say about Dennis and the other medalists. You know, we talked about Lori Harper just last week, who was our featured interview last week. When I posted that episode in the Facebook group, I asked other medalists to raise their hand and to comment just so we could say thank you and congratulate them. And I was shocked to see how many, not only, official Joslin medalists we have in the Facebook group, but how many people who have lived a long time with diabetes. And I so appreciate if that was you, for raising your hand, for saying, hi, I'm here, it's me. Because I think to some of you folks, it seems like, well, I'm just living my life, right? But man, not only is it inspiring, it's incredibly educational for most of us. I mean, I'm a parent of a kid with type 1. I don't have diabetes, but I can learn so much from you. We had a great response so far to last week's episode on, not just on Lori, who has a great story, but on the Joslin medalist study, and a lot of requests to do more. So I will definitely be following up. As I've said, this year is heavy on technology. It just kind of took off on its own. We've done a lot more episodes on living well and living longer and getting older with diabetes. So I'm kind of glad that we fell into that because it's really struck a nerve. I'm not sure if it's just not being covered elsewhere, but I'll try to dig in a little bit more and cover those kinds of topics with the personal stories, which are great, but also with more information. So keep your questions coming and I'll see what I can do. Okay, well, let's talk about Sage Donnelly. And boy, the other end of the spectrum, Sage is 21, but she has already lived with type 1 diabetes for 18 years. And she has a pretty incredible story. When you Google her, you will see things like, busiest elite kayaker on the planet, incredible competitor, getting the balance right, traveling all over the world. As I mentioned, she was the Junior Women's Freestyle World Champion. She won a bunch of other titles, as you can imagine. As you heard in that tease at the beginning, she really got in her own boat at 5 years old, and she hasn't stopped since. She earned a spot in the 2020 Olympics in Japan. Yeah, the ones that were delayed. And that delay seems to have really changed things for Sage. I'll let her tell you more about how the change happened and what she's up to now. But you should also know that in addition to type 1, she lives with celiac and she has thyroid disease. So she's got a lot going on. So much fun to talk to Sage. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But first, welcome to our newest sponsor. Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Afrezza. Since I started this podcast, one of the highest interest topics has been Afrezza inhalable insulin. I'm so excited to partner with them to tell you more. Afrezza is an ultra-rapid acting mealtime insulin. You breathe it in using an oral inhaler. Once inhaled, Afrezza passes quickly through your lungs and enters your bloodstream in less than 1 minute and may start reducing blood sugars within about 12 minutes. Find out more and see if Afrezza is right for you. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Afrezza logo. Afrezza can cause serious side effects, including sudden lung problems and low potassium, and is not for patients with chronic lung disease such as asthma or COPD, or for patients allergic to insulin. Tell your doctor if you ever smoked, have ever had kidney or liver problems, a history of lung cancer, or if you are pregnant or breastfeeding. Most common side effects are low blood sugar, cough, and sore throat. Severe low blood sugar can be fatal. Do not replace long-acting insulin with Afrezza. Afrezza is not for use to treat diabetic ketoacidosis. Please see full prescribing information. Sage, thank you so much for joining me. Pardon my voice. I'm sorry I have this cold, but I'm glad you had time to come and talk to us.
Oh, me too. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, we're going to talk a lot about kayaking and sports and everything else that you're involved with. Let's just start out by talking about your diagnosis, because you were quite young. You were 3 years old. Do you remember anything about your diagnosis?
The only thing I really remember was how disgusting the hospital food was. But we went on a multi-day river trip. We were driving back, and it was a few-day drive back. The river was in Colorado. I was 3 years old, and I was a kid who had an iron bladder. I never went to the bathroom at night at all, would go a few times a day kind of thing. And suddenly I started peeing every hour, every half hour, and waking up all through the night to go to the bathroom. And so my dad luckily is a paramedic, and he was like, okay, she either has a bladder infection or she's diabetic. So upon arriving home, 2 or 3 days later, we went straight to my dad's fire station. He pulled out a glucometer, checked my blood sugar, and I was 360, I believe. So we called my doctor and hey, we're diabetic. And then, went to the emergency room and we started learning everything. And funnily enough, the main thing I remember from my diagnosis was I was starving. I hadn't eaten all day because, I wasn't on insulin yet. We had went to the emergency room. We're waiting to be admitted. And finally, it was super late in the evening when they finally brought me food. And I took this big bite of mac and cheese. I was so excited. And I was like, Mommy, this is disgusting. And so my parents, when I was about 1 or 2 years old, they bought this big Sportsmobile Ford van. So it has it's pretty much a small house inside. So they had actually already brought the van up, and they went outside and they made me eggs, broccoli, and garbanzo bean scramble. And they brought it back in, and I just remember them me starving and my parents fighting with the doctors, being no, this is 20 carbs, it's just the garbanzo beans that are carbs. And they were we measured it out. It's fine. We'll give her this much insulin. And the doctors were just no, you can't do that. And they're yes, we can. She needs to eat. So that's my main memory of diagnosis.
That's hysterical. Do you think that your dad's experience made it a little bit more calm for them? I mean, I've got to admit, kind of took me back to Benny's diagnosis. Being 2, we were in a panic, but we also had no medical background.
Yeah, I think it definitely helped. I mean, my dad is very kind of type A. When a problem arises, you find the solutions and you just deal with it. And there's not too many emotions or anything like that. So he definitely took it obviously he was very upset.
Oh, sure.
But as far as how it affected him, he was pretty just okay, this is life now. We're going to deal with it. And I think my mom definitely took it harder. She also has kind of a vague medical background. She was a firefighter for a lot of years. And now she's a massage therapist. She was kind of in the same boat of we're going to deal with it. Obviously, I'm upset, but I think I was super lucky as far as how fast I was diagnosed, because it was pretty instant of oh, something's wrong. We're going to deal with it. And actually, my grandpa was also diagnosed at the age of 3, but none of us really knew anything about diabetes because he passed away right after my dad was born from complications.
Oh, wow.
So
A totally different time, right? I mean,
Definitely.
that's really, it's hard to hear, but it's such a different time.
Hard to hear, but it makes you realize how lucky we are.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I also read you were kayaking at age 3. Is that right? How does that work? You're so tiny.
Right. I started paddling in a 2-person boat with my dad when I was 2. So that means there's like a kayak and we're both enclosed inside. It's a whitewater kayak, so we'll run like rapids and stuff like that, but we both were enclosed inside of it. My dad did most of the work, obviously, but basically I was raised from before my diagnosis even to just like, my parents loved to be outdoors. They skied, they rock climbed, they kayaked, like they were just very adventurous. And they're like, we're having a kid, but we're not going to stop doing the things we love. So kid, you're coming with. So that's how I started kayaking. And it was such a cool thing because it was, my mom would come down in her kayak, separate from us. And it was this big, like, fun family thing. So yeah, I kind of naturally kept going with that. And when I was 5, I got in my own boat and started running like kind of smaller, easier rivers. And then when I was 7, I was like, I want to start competing because every year we went to Colorado and watched a bunch of competitions. I was like, well, I want to do the competitions. Why are we sitting here? And then my life took off from there.
Yeah, I'll say. Talk to us, for people like me who really are not familiar with the sport at all, and I apologize. Talk to us a little bit about what the competition is. This isn't just like a race where you're, it's not a rowing race where you going from one place to the next as quickly as possible in a straight line and smooth water.
And no worries at all. No one knows what kayaking is very well, whitewater kayaking specifically. I get asked so often what my favorite lake to paddle on is.
Right.
I chose like the smallest sport to get into, so don't sweat it. But basically, so there's different disciplines of whitewater kayaking. I decided to compete in high levels in all of them because I'm crazy. But basically, so there's freestyle kayaking, which I'm a previous world champion in. And freestyle kayaking, basically, the best way I can describe it is it's gymnastics in the water.
Wow.
Except instead of just, flipping our boat and doing like front flips, we're doing that while surfing a wave, basically. So if you imagine like a stationary ocean wave, but a little bit smaller, and most of the time a little bit smaller. Sometimes they can be that big though. And basically we're doing like front flips, just acrobatic movements on a wave, and we get judged. There's normally 3 judges. And there's a criteria for each trick. So we're judged if we meet that criteria, and then we get added points on top of that if we had more air or if we didn't use a paddle stroke and stuff like that. So that's freestyle. And then we have slalom kayaking. And slalom actually has 2 different types. It's called canoe and kayak. So kayak is when you're sitting on your butt with your legs out in front of you. You have 2 blades on your paddle. And then canoe is when you're actually kneeling in a boat. With like just full on like kneel, like you're doing yoga, and you only have 1 paddle blade. If you've ever gone whitewater rafting and you've had that like kind of 1-bladed paddle that you paddle with, it's similar to that, but much better, much nicer to paddle with. So I did that. And then slalom is basically when you go point A to point B, and it's a little bit like skiing slalom. So we have gates we have to navigate through, but instead of just, gates that you go back and forth through, we have gates we go down through, and we have gates that we go up through. And each course they're about 1:30 for time, sometimes a little bit longer. And there's about 22 gates on average in a course. So there's that. And then there's also what I'm mainly focusing on now, which is creeking. And basically creek boating is the most extreme side of kayaking. And there's like just normal creeking, which is kind of what I'm mainly focusing on right now, which is just going down like some of the most difficult whitewater you can find all around the world. And then there's creek racing, which is racing from point A to point B. The time range varies from like 30 minutes to 2 minutes, but basically point A to point B over some of the hardest whitewater in the world.
Wow. I mean, and you've been all over the world. It's incredible to see. You've been doing this for such a long time. I'm looking at like New Zealand and Australia. And, is travel difficult for you? Is it fun for you? Is it just part of your life?
I don't regret traveling at all. It's been absolutely amazing. I've seen so many incredible places, and I'm super lucky for that. But I gotta admit to you, I am a little burnt out. I've been pretty much full time on the road, probably 10 months out of the year since 12 or younger, but definitely started picking up pretty hardcore at 12. And then I pretty much lived in Europe away from like my family and all my friends for the past 5 years. So it's been a very long time of running from place to place, living out of a suitcase. And I'm a little ready for a break. I actually, kind of to expand on that, I actually was full-time training slalom. I was trying to make the last Olympics, the Tokyo Olympics, and COVID hit and the Olympics were delayed. A bunch of my world championships were canceled, and I decided to come home right before full-on lockdown happened. And I remember, like, we were lucky enough to know my parents kayak, so we all could stay quarantined and still go kayak and stay away from everyone. But we went kayaking on this one river that I hadn't run in years. And it's just like a mellow, beautiful California river. And I remember getting back out there and I was just so happy. And I was like, wow, like I haven't felt this way while kayaking in so long. So that's why I took a step back from slalom and I am not traveling as much anymore.
Well, and I was going to ask you about that because it looked right when the Olympics were delayed. A lot of people made some difficult choices. So you did not ultimately end up competing, right, when they rescheduled it? Right back to Sage. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Omnipod. I remember years ago when Benny first started on the Animas insulin pump, an upgrade came out. We had to wait years to be eligible for it because of insurance requirements. How frustrating is that? I am so glad things are changing. For example, the Omnipod Promise takes those worries away. With the Omnipod Promise, you can upgrade to Omnipod 5 as soon as it's available to you and covered by insurance, all for no additional upfront cost. Omnipod is available through the pharmacy, which means you won't be tied to a long-term contract and are free to upgrade at any time. Not to mention, you can pick up your pods right where you pick up your insulin. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Omnipod logo. For full safety, risk information, and Omnipod Promise terms and conditions, also visit omnipod.com. Now, back to Sage talking about choosing not to go to the rescheduled Olympics.
I did not. I actually didn't even show up to the team trials. I love the sport of slalom. It's amazing. And the things that it's taught me have definitely, like, I would not be the kayaker I am today without them. It's just up to my skill level so much. But it was a very toxic sport for me. Just like a lot of sports that you try to go to the Olympic level on, they're amazing and they have so much good in them, but they also have a lot of bad. And it got to the point where the bad was just outweighing the good so much that it was time for a change for me.
I give you a lot of credit.
Regretted it too much.
I give you a lot of credit. That had to be a very difficult decision, and it had to be. I imagine you had great support with your family. It sounds like you just were having a good time when you were back home.
Definitely, yeah. It made it a lot easier. I think I hadn't realized how little my parents really cared about me going to the Olympics and stuff. And I had come home and they were just stoked to have me home. Like I hadn't, been home for a long time and in years. It was very brief visits. They were just happy and they're like, oh, you want to change directions? Like, that's fine. We don't care. You're going to be home more. This is great. That definitely, it surprised me. And I don't know why, because my parents have always been incredibly supportive, but it made it so much easier.
I'm so glad to hear that. Hey, let me ask you a couple of questions about diabetes and water. Because I know you're laughing, but as a mom,
question.
Right? As a mom of a kid with type 1, he's always been sporty and active, and his summer camp always goes like whitewater kayaking, every summer. Mm-hmm. And we've over the years tried some different things in terms of diabetes. I'm curious what works for you. I'm assuming, and maybe I shouldn't, I'm assuming you wear an insulin pump?
I do, yeah. So I'm actually on a tandem t:slim pump right now. And I've tried about every insulin pump on the market. I refuse to get on an Omnipod because a Dexcom gets rubbed off underneath my gear. So I can only imagine an Omnipod underneath all my stuff. So as far as water goes, the hardest part obviously is figuring out how to store it. You can get like a waterproof radio pack from this company called Aquapack. And I think they're based out of Canada. And they actually have an insulin pump specific one, but they only sell it in Canada. So you have to get the radio one if you live in the U.S. But it's not too bad. It's not massively huge on your pump. And it's a little bulky, but I put my pump in that every time I go kayaking and that's in the summer. Anytime I'm really outside, in the water in summer, I'll use that and it helps a lot. It works really well. But as far as like winter paddling, I actually get really lucky because I get to wear like a head to toe suit that keeps me completely dry. So I actually just stick my insulin pump in my sports bra then, and I can like, there's latex gaskets on the neck, so I can just reach down awkwardly, like down my neck and like pull my pump out and look at it. And I honestly prefer it when it's kind of cooler and I get to wear my dry suit because it's just mellow and easy. And then as far as like actually managing it, I think the control IQ on the T-Slim has helped me so much. It's been insane. I actually went to having my lowest A1C ever since I've been on the T-Slim, which has been really cool. Yeah, it's been amazing. I can't say like enough good things about this pump. I've been shocked. And like, obviously it is a little more delicate because it's touch screen and I've smashed a few on accident because I'm also a huge klutz and I just fall over on things. But they've like been great at replacing my pump. And yeah, it's been great. But before that, I was on a Medtronic, and you know, they say those pumps are waterproof, but I broke 10 in the span of like a couple years.
Oh no.
It was out of control. It was very rough. So yeah, I mean, I think that just like taking care of your pump and finding a good waterproof system that you like and you can use is really good. And also like sometimes I'll just take one of those little, not the super cheap phone dry bags, but they have like small kind of dry bags you can Google. They have them at REI a lot of times sometimes, but I'll just get one of those. And it's a little awkward because you have to roll your tubing up into it a little bit to get like the dry seal. But I've honestly had great like things with just a small phone dry bag too. There's definitely options.
Yeah. So you mentioned you have issues with the Dexcom kind of rubbing off, as you said. Do you try to wear a CGM, or is that something that you've just kind of stopped?
No, I do wear the Dexcom, but I've discovered I cannot wear it on my arms. So I have like huge arms, not to like brag or anything, but I do have very large muscular arms. And basically all of my gear obviously is like pretty form-fitting. Most of it's made out of Gore-Tex material. So it's not a nice fabric. It's very like rough. It's built to last because we're obviously trekking through these deep river canyons, like brushing against thorns and trees and all that. So it's not like a wimpy fabric. It's not like wearing a t-shirt. And yeah, anytime I wear my Dexcom on my arms, it like hurts. It rubs off. It doesn't like give good readings. So I actually wear my Dexcom on my stomach religiously and it works fantastic. But yeah, I've discovered the like best spot for your Dexcom I cannot use at all.
And that was kind of a dumb question, I realize. I'm going to blame my cold for that because you went on about the Control IQ, which of course you need the Dexcom for it to work.
You know, sometimes it's hard to put two and two together. I don't blame you at all.
That's funny. What about treating lows and things when you're out on the water?
I have this ridiculously massive dry bag that I just keep in between my legs of my kayak. And I keep 2 spare sight changes in there. I keep a spare vial of insulin, obviously, that I take in and out every day, but I have Novolog, so it's been mellow. Obviously, I've had issues with the Novolog overheating in the past, but in the past, like 3 years, I barely put my Novolog in a refrigerator, and it's been great. But don't tell anyone. I don't recommend it. Do it your own risk. Do it your own risk.
Yeah, we have found, again, not FDA approved, we found insulin to be heartier than we have been told. But exactly, follow manufacturer directions, please. But
yeah, so then on top of that, I keep like, I've become a huge, huge fan of like apple juice boxes lately. That's my go-to because they're like small. They don't fall apart in my dry bag. They can last a while. And the ones I get are like 20 carbs. But I've also discovered a lot of apple, like juice box companies are starting to add water to their juice. So they're only like 10 carbs a box. So keep an eye out for that if you want to get juice boxes. I got burned the other day. I bought like a big old pack and didn't check. And now I just have these gross water things. And then besides that, I love jelly beans too. I keep jelly beans in my dry bag and I'll actually measure them out in little baggies. So like 10 carbs a baggie because I have a tendency to overcorrect my loads. But also when I'm on like really big, that's kind of my day to day, what I keep in my bag. And then when I'm on like these really long, cause I'll actually go into river canyons for like 3 or more days at a time. And basically we're carrying all of the gear we need and all of the food we need in our kayaks and doing like as pretty difficult whitewater in like waterfalls and all that. So it's definitely, it's a lot of work on your body. And so for that, I actually will carry in, cause obviously weight's an issue because most of the time we're hiking our kayaks in. So I'll bring in like powdered lemonade or powdered Gatorade, and that'll be like my thing that I kind of sip on all day. And then I'm a really big fan of the Honey Stinger Goose.
Oh, yeah.
Because those are like pure, like fuel. Like if you're low, that thing will save you. They're fantastic. And I also really love they make these like little Honey Singer also makes these little like gummy chews, and those are just like tasty and yummy and great. So that's what I keep in like my more extreme hardcore, like you're probably going to be fighting lows all day bag.
So you have kind of mentioned that you were looking maybe for something new or at something different. Do you mind sharing, or can I ask what is next for you?
What is next? So I'm still trying to figure out what is next for me right now. You know, I came out of a really, really bad mental place when I quit slalom. It was a very, like I mentioned, a toxic environment. So I've been kind of learning how to process and heal from all of that very slowly. And I feel way better now. And there's still things that come up and I'm like, oh, wow, it's a new thing I need to like figure out and like deal with and just work through. But yeah, basically what's next for me this year is I have my biggest competition is in mid-June. It's in Idaho. It's called the North Fork Championship. Basically one of the biggest creek races in the world, pretty much. So I actually won it last year. So I'm going back in this year trying to defend my title, which is pretty nerve-wracking because my mental game with competing right now is not great. Trying to figure that out, hopefully going in and racing my best and having a good run. And then beyond that, I think I'm going to go up to Canada with my friend in like September. And I'm going to go run a bunch of like really big rivers up there. Hopefully we're talking about looking at some first descents, which a first descent is obviously you were the first person to go run a river or
cool.
a drop. So yeah, so we're trying to make that happen, hopefully. And beyond that, I actually opened a photography business at the very end of last year. So I'm trying to get that off the ground. I have my first wedding booked in end of May. So just working on that and growing my baby. And I'm also going to school. So yeah, a lot of stuff. I stay busy.
Okay, I may have heard you wrong. Growing your baby?
Growing, like my business baby.
Oh.
Sorry. I thought we were on the subject of business. I thought that translated well. No babies. Absolutely no babies right now.
You're also working with Revelwear, which I started working with recently as well. You have a great picture. I think it's you, right? You took this picture where you're like upside down.
Yes, I'm a sucker for a good handstand. But yeah, I was trying to like think of things I could do because there's so many people that have come across that are like, oh, well, the pump won't stay in that pocket. It's too shallow. And so I was like, you know what? I'll do a handstand with my belt on. It's like if it stays in a handstand, surely it's going to stay like for most activities, right? Right.
And I should say Revelwear is this group that they make insulin pump pockets that go, they're in different clothing, but they're a patented pocket. So it's not loose. It does stay in. So that it's really interesting to see how it all works. I thought that was very clever to say, oh, I'm going to do a handstand. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, and also, like, Revelwear is really cool. If anyone listening to this wants to check them out, I definitely recommend it. Not just because I'm working with them, but because I only back myself with companies that I actually, believe in. And I swear, these guys have thought of everything. They have, like, 2 pockets in each of their products, so you can wear your pump on any side. There's actually a hole that threads through into the pocket so you can protect your tubing. So doorknobs and various other things won't rip your side out, because I don't know how many times your son has done that.
Yeah.
But I do it constantly. Yeah, they're a great company. So if anyone's looking for pump pockets, they're fantastic.
Very cool. I also get the impression that your parents, I don't know about laid back being the right term. I don't want to put that on them. But, you're diagnosed at 3. You're already in the kayak with your dad, and you sound like you went right back in. Even so, at 3 years old, I've got to imagine they were very involved in your care. As you grew up, how did you pull for more independence? Because it's one thing I remember watching Benny, like, let's say he's playing on a field, right? He's not too far away from me. But being out on the water, you can't reach your child right away, right? You don't know where they are half the time. How did your family become comfortable with that? I guess what I'm looking for, too, is maybe some advice for very nervous parents.
Right. I think the best thing my parents did for me is, yes, they were very involved in my diabetes when I was younger, but it wasn't they were managing it. They were teaching me how to manage it, and they were, like, there to help if needed. But it was very much, this is what you need to do. We'll help you and we'll help you learn. But it wasn't like they were managing it. It was, I was always given the opportunity to figure it out myself or to check my blood sugars and stuff like that. Obviously, they helped me with my site change. I think I needed help with site changes till I was like 8 or 9 and stuff like that. They were, the parent was just like, go shove a needle in yourself. They were very supportive. But I think with the management, it wasn't like, oh, we're going to do something to your pump, or, oh, we're going to give you a bolus. It's, hey, do the math. Like, how much should we give you for this meal? Or, hey, your blood sugar is this, and we're going to go for a hike. What do you think we should do? So I was very, very involved. Even though they were monitoring, I was still kind of the one, like, learning how to do everything, if that makes sense.
It sure does. Do you remember a time, or one of the first times, where you said, I've got this, and you were kind of almost totally on your own, or totally on your own?
I was lucky because my parents just traveled. Like, one of my parents always kind of traveled with me most of my trips, just because, they didn't trust my coaches, who had no idea what kind of disease I had, to make sure I had everything I needed, which was very valid. My coaches on the U.S. team never tried to learn anything about diabetes, which sucked. But that's a whole different story. But I mean, besides that, I think there was a trip when I was 10, I believe, where I went to Legoland with my friend for her birthday, and I think it was like 3 days. And I think that was my first time going alone. And it was kind of one of those where I was like, Mom, like, I don't want to put a new side on by myself. It's going to hurt. And she's like, you know what? It's 3 days. Like, you'll probably be fine. We'll just change it when you get home. But you know how to do it in case you have to. And I was like, yeah, like, I'll be okay. So we actually went to the beach. It was a disaster. I somehow, even though I had a plug-in, stand, like, somehow got, like, all jammed in my sight to the point where I couldn't take my plug out and put, like, my pump back on. So I had to take the side off, and I was like, oh my God, I don't want to, like, put the needle in myself. So I spent, like, a couple minutes trying to convince myself to, like, push the buttons on either side. And I finally did it, and it, like, didn't hurt that bad. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, I can do it. It's not horrible. And yeah, then just kind of from there, it was like, oh, well, I can put my side on myself. And then it got to the point where I was like, please don't help me with sides. Yes. I don't trust you.
Yes, that's a common story, right? I have to do it myself, so I will.
Yeah, definitely important.
You also said before we started taping something about going to Europe? Because I was talking about independence. You were like, well, I just went to Europe. Can you tell that story?
I lived in Europe almost full time for the past 4 or 5 years. Because basically it was either I had to live in North Carolina to train slalom, or I had to live in Europe because there's just no facilities or coaches out on the West Coast, which I'm from Carson City, Nevada. I wasn't a fan of North Carolina, and neither were my parents, so I pretty much started, spending most of my year in Europe. Oh, sorry, my pump is beeping now. Wouldn't be an interview about diabetes without the pump beeping. Back to what I was saying. Sorry about that. It was kind of like the obvious choice of, we need to go to spend a lot of time in Europe. And basically, the year I was turning 18 was when I pretty much started spending, I would say, 10 months out of the year, more or less, out there. And yeah, in the winter, I would live in Spain, and I would train with a Spanish team for a while. And then I started living in Spain and in the UK in the winter. And then obviously summer was race season, so it was just all over the place. But yeah, it was fun. It was cool. It was a great experience. But I'm a little traveled out. I'm ready to just settle down and be mellow for a bit.
All right. Before I let you go, I have to tell you, I was cracking up silently when you mentioned North Carolina. You're talking about the Whitewater Center near Charlotte?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I live 20 minutes from the Whitewater Center in Charlotte.
Oh, no way. That's hilarious. Yes. It's a great spot. Don't get me wrong. The last time I was there, I got chemical pneumonia because they started pouring like chlorine and bleach into the water. It's just not my favorite place.
They have had some issues for sure with that facility. We have only ever gone, what they've done, if you're not familiar, and you should look it up, is they have this amazing, and we all thought when they built it, 20 years ago, or started talking about it 20 years ago, what are you doing? Like, why are you building a whitewater training center in the middle of landlocked Charlotte, North Carolina? But it was to bring people here to train, and they built a beautiful facility around it. So if you go, people have corporate outings and parties. There's bikes, there's rope courses, there's team training. We've done JDRF events there. But I got to tell you, I've never been in the water. And I believe all the issues are resolved, but there were some issues. So I just had to bring that up.
Yeah, it was really cool. Like, it's a great spot, but definitely just not really for me. I still come out to North Carolina and race on the Green River pretty much every year. I might skip it this year, but yeah, I love North Carolina. Just living in a concrete jungle isn't really my scene. I'm very much so a mountains and small town kind of gal. So Charlotte was a lot for me. And yeah, also, if anyone listening to this does want to go whitewater rafting, I do really recommend it. Go to a natural river. They're much more fun, and you won't get abused against concrete because concrete hurts.
I will not be calling the Chamber of Commerce to alert them of this episode.
Fantastic.
I love it.
Banned.
Sage, thank you so much for joining me. This was so terrific. I apologize again for my cold, but thank you so much for sharing your story, and all the best to everything that lies ahead for you.
Well, thank you so much. And yeah, this has been super fun. Thanks for having me, and thanks for pushing through the cold. That's never fun.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More information about Sage and her photography and that photo. I don't think I could put that photo in the show notes, but I'll put the photo of her upside down and the Revelwear thing that we talked about. I'll put that photo in the Diabetes Connections Facebook group, but everything else on the homepage at diabetes-connections.com. Wasn't that funny about the Charlotte Whitewater Center? It really is an amazing place. We've had a big JDRF event there and people love it. But yeah, I understand what she's saying. That was funny though. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Revelwear and some other events coming up in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And I get a lot of questions about Dexcom coverage for people on Medicare. And why not? It's not as though you stop needing a CGM the minute you turn 65. The good news is that the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitoring system is covered for Medicare for patients who meet the coverage criteria. If you have either type 1 or type 2 diabetes and you intensively manage insulin, you may be covered. To find out more about what that means and if you qualify, check out dexcom.com/G6-Medicare. I will link that up. You don't have to write it down. You're going to want to talk to your doctor, and you may even be able to get your Dexcom supplies at the pharmacy, saving time and money. Learn more at dexcom.com/G6-Medicare. That link will be in the show notes. Just go to the homepage. I want to tell you real quick about Revelwear, not to do a commercial necessarily, but Sage and I brought that up during the interview because she sent me that great photo of her doing a handstand. You're going to see a little bit more about Revelwear, mostly in some emails that are going out. They are my newest Book to Clinic sponsor. And if you're not familiar, boy, I'm so appreciative of them. My Book to Clinic folks basically pay for copies of The World's Worst Diabetes Mom, my book, to go to pediatric endocrinology clinics. When the book came out, I was surprised to find, I was really excited to find, but also surprised to find that educators and endos were recommending it to their patients. I mean, it was so cool. It's a fun book and it is full of good advice, but it's not medical advice per se. So that's what kind of took me by surprise, but they recommend it. So I put into place this program where you can sponsor a set of books to go for free to these clinics. So big thank you to Revelwear. And they make all this clothing with unique patented pockets. They really are different. They're the kind of pockets that things cannot fall out of. They sell them for people who just want to put phones and other stuff. It's not just a diabetes company, but they realized quickly that this was a really big need in our community, and they've jumped in. So you're going to hear and see more about them. I just liked when something comes up like that. I didn't want to interrupt the interview to do this whole big song and dance about the Book to Clinic program, but I did want to disclose that they certainly have paid me, and you will be seeing more about them in emails. And if you get a book for free, maybe you will see them mentioned. There's a big sticker that goes on the front and a little note inside. If you're interested in becoming a Book to Clinic sponsor, please let me know. Couple of housekeeping notes. I am traveling this week. You can follow me on Instagram. I'm probably going to post a little bit about where we're going. Doing some college visits with Benny has nothing to do with the podcast, although I am meeting up with some diabetes friends. But that also means there is going to be no In the News episode this week. I just can't swing it. A little too much going on. If there's crazy breaking news, I'll try to get something done. But this is the only episode scheduled for this week. Next week, we will be back on track with the Tuesday long format interview episode, and then the Friday In the News podcast and the social media video episode. I don't even know what to call it, where I do In the News live on social. That happens on Wednesdays. So there's a lot going on. There are a lot of spring breaks and holidays happening this week. So if you are celebrating Passover or Easter, I wish you all the best for a lovely holiday, maybe with family and friends, and hopefully different than it's been for the last couple of years, but be safe out there. All right, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.